I'm going to be reading from Seed to Civilization by Charles B. Heiser Jr., published in 1973. I'm going to be reading from chapter 7 called The Starchy Staples, and we're going to do the potato. The white or Irish potato, Solanum tuberosum, which rivals wheat in volume produced and value, had a long way to go before it became an acceptable food plant in Europe, but few plants have figured more prominently in Western history than has the potato. The story begins in South America. Wild potatoes are fairly widespread in the Americas, particularly in the Andes. They were probably found to be a valuable food when man first entered this area, and at some undetermined time, probably more than 4,000 years ago, they came to be intentionally cultivated. With selection by man, there was an increase in size, and the potato became the most important food plant in the high Andes, for it thrives at an elevation where few other cultivated plants will grow. Maize will not grow at elevations much higher than 11,000 feet, and is not a particularly productive plant at that altitude, but potatoes do well at 15,000 feet. Frost, common in parts of the Andes, is not conducive to keeping potatoes, but the Indians found how to make it an ally. Potatoes were allowed to freeze at night, and the next day the Indians would stamp on the thawing potatoes. This process, repeated for several days, removes the water, resulting in a desiccated potato called chuño, which may be kept almost indefinitely and used as required. Thus was born one of man's original quote-unquote freeze-dried foods, in a sense the forerunner of instant mashed potatoes, but with a somewhat different taste. Although the flavor of chuño is not pleasing to all foreign visitors in the Andes, it is still the staff of life to many Indians in highland Peru and Bolivia. The potato was cultivated throughout the length of the Andes in prehistoric time, but it did not make its way to Central America until introduced by the Spanish. The first European on record as seeing the potato in America thought it was a strange food and compared it to the truffle. It was introduced into Europe in 1570, but its acceptance was far from immediate. The Jerusalem artichoke, introduced from North America at about the same time as the potato, was welcomed and was soon regarded as food fit for a queen. Today it is seldom used for food, but the potato prevails. The slow acceptance of the potato was due to several factors. The newly introduced plant probably was not very productive at first, and the fact that it was recognized as a member of the nightshade family may have contributed to a reluctance to accept it. At this time, the nightshade family was known in Europe mainly through its poisonous members, mandrake, henbane, and belladonna, and the family had not yet provided any important foods. Even after the potato gained some acceptance as food, there were many who disapproved of it. One minister preached against it, stating that if God had intended it as food for man, it would have been mentioned in the Bible. Several writers of the time condemned it for its flatulent or quote-unquote windy property, among other reasons. At the start of the 16th century, it was thought to be an aphrodisiac, stemming from confusion with the sweet potato. But this, of course, may have increased its use among some people. Promoted by royalty in some countries, the potato gradually became more widely grown. Various wars that destroyed standing crops of other food plants at the time helped to increase its popularity, for the potato tubers, safe underground, could not be destroyed by burning as easily as a field of grain. The potato did not become really common in Europe before the 18th century, and there can be little doubt that it contributed to the increase of the population at that time, not because of any aphrodisiac property, but because of its food value. World War I has even been blamed on the potato, since it was responsible for the increased population that has been considered a contributing factor to the war. Certainly, it was the potato that helped to keep Germany alive during 2 world wars. In the early part of the 19th century, the potato had become the dominant food in Ireland. In fact, it was almost the sole food of the peasantry, and the average per-person consumption of potatoes was 10 to 12 pounds a day. When a blight struck in 1845 and 1846, wiping out nearly the entire crop, famine followed. An estimated 1.5 million people died as a result, and another million emigrated, many to the Americas. The blight disease was not understood at the time, and only later was it recognized that it was caused by a fungus. Since that time, plant pathologists and breeders have devoted a great deal of effort to controlling the disease and developing resistant varieties. Much has been accomplished, but blight still causes serious losses in many parts of the world. It has been thought that eating blighted potatoes had no ill effect on humans, but recently it has been shown that a high incidence of certain kinds of birth defects characterizes areas where potato blight is common. In an experiment, marmosets who ate blighted potatoes as part of their ration produced some offspring showing birth defects. A control group of the animals, fed an ordinary diet, bore all healthy young. Although the potato is often referred to as a root crop, actually the part eaten is an underground stem specialized for food storage and known botanically as a tuber. The eyes of the potatoes are buds, and the so-called seed potatoes used for propagation are not seeds at all, but portions of tubers containing an eye. Potato plants rarely flower in some northern areas, but they are capable of flowering and do so throughout much of their range. The attractive white, blue, or pink flowers produce small green berries, something like a small unripe tomato that contains seeds. Although these true seeds are not used by the farmer, they are important to the plant breeders in creating new varieties. Vegetative reproduction, which is asexual, gives rise, with rare exceptions, to types exactly like the parent. Sexual reproduction by seed, on the other hand, allows for the production of new combinations, some of which may be superior to the parents. The potato tuber, like most vegetables, is mostly water and contains 17 to 34% carbohydrate, small amounts of protein, a trace of fat, and some vitamin C. Varieties commonly cultivated in the North Temperate Zone contain from 1 to 3% protein, but some in the Andes are known with 6 or 7%. Much of the greatest food value of the potato, which lies next to the skin, is removed and therefore lost through the practice of deep peeling. The potato reveals its relationship to the other nightshades not only in its flower and fruit, but also in that it may contain the toxic alkaloid solanine. Potato tubers grown exposed to light turn green and produce solanine. Eating of the leaves or other green parts of the plants has caused poisoning in livestock and humans. The English name potato for this plant is a mistake that goes back to the time of its introduction into England. The word potato is actually derived from batata, an Indian name for the sweet potato. There was considerable confusion over the new root crops being introduced into Europe in the 16th century, and the name of the sweet potato became attached to the white potato, where it remains. Today, some 300 million tons of potatoes are produced annually. More than 90% of the production is in Europe, with the Soviet Union, Poland, and Germany being the most productive. In addition to their use as food for humans, large amounts of potatoes are fed to livestock in Europe, and some go into the production of starch, used chiefly for sizing cloth and paper. Potatoes also serve as a source of alcohol, both for drinking and for industrial purposes. The potato reached the United States from Europe by way of Bermuda in 1621, rather than directly from South America. In the United States today, about 8 million tons are grown for direct consumption and 5 million for use in other ways, much of it also reaching the table as potato chips, frozen French fries, and dehydrated potatoes. A small amount is used for starch. The bulk of starch produced in the United States, however, is made from maize. The potato is, of course, still widely grown in the Andes and in Mexico and Central America as well. It has been grown in India since the 17th century and later reached Africa, where it is now grown in the highlands, particularly in Kenya. It cannot be grown successfully in the lowland tropics, where its place in man's diet is taken over by some of the other starch crops, particularly manioc. Along with the studies aimed at improving the potato, considerable study is also being given to its origin. The potato is a tetraploid species, and the identity of the wild species that are involved in its origin is still unknown. Many closely related wild species occur in the Andes. The suggestion has been made that it was first domesticated in the area of Lake Titicaca on the borders of Peru and Bolivia. In the spring of 1970, 5 million pounds of potatoes were destroyed by fire in eastern Idaho. It was no accident, for the fire had been deliberately set by farmers in an attempt to raise the price. The same news report also carried the information that an estimated 15 million Americans are underfed.